Kicked out as a teen for false rumors, spread by my brother years later, parents see my success and demand money. Growing up in a home filled with favoritism and neglect, a young woman was cast aside while her twin brother was showered with love. Betrayed by his lies, she was falsely accused of abuse and abandoned by her own parents. Years later, after building a thriving career, they suddenly reappeared demanding money. But this time, she held the power, forcing them to face the painful truth they had long ignored. A childhood stained by favoritism and betrayal. From the moment I could comprehend the world around me, I understood that my twin brother and I were treated differently. Though we were born on the same day, to the same parents, under the same roof, we may as well have been strangers in the eyes of my family. My parents adored my brother. He was their golden child, the one they believed was destined for greatness. I, on the other hand, was always an afterthought, the black sheep who could never measure up to their expectations. It was a truth that became more apparent with each passing year. I wasn't rebellious or ungrateful. I simply had different interests than my brother. While he excelled in academics and was naturally introverted, I was drawn to sports, socializing, and exploring the world outside our home. But to my parents, my interests weren't just different, they were wrong. My hobbies were seen as distractions, and instead of supporting me, they tried to mold me into a version of my brother. Every report card that came home felt like a battlefield. Even if I did well, my achievements were met with half-hearted nods or dismissive comments. Meanwhile, if my brother excelled in anything, it was cause for celebration. They lavished praise on him, rewarded him with gifts, and spoke endlessly about how he was destined for success. If he made a mistake, they excused it. If I made one, I was punished. Birthdays became a painful reminder. Even our birthdays, a day that was supposed to be equally special for both of us, became a painful reminder of my place in the family. Every year, my brother's birthday party was a grand affair. He had elaborate celebrations with balloons, expensive cakes, and all his friends gathered around him. I, however, was lucky if I even got a cake at all. When I asked why I couldn't have a party like him, my parents brushed me off with vague excuses about budgeting or priorities. Yet, they somehow always found the means to throw extravagant parties for him. As I got older, the stark contrast in our treatment only deepened. While my brother had the freedom to invite friends over, I was rarely allowed to do the same. If I asked for something, I had to prove why I deserved it. If my brother wanted something, he got it without question. It didn't matter how much I tried to earn their approval. I was never enough. The only person who cared, the only person who ever made me feel truly loved, was my grandmother. Whenever she visited, she brought me my favorite chocolates, small gifts, or slipped me a few dollars to treat myself later. She was my safe haven, the one person who saw me for who I truly was. Unlike my parents, she never compared me to my brother. Instead, she encouraged me to pursue my passions and assured me that I was just as valuable, just as worthy as he was. She often noticed how my parents treated me and subtly tried to intervene, but her words fell on deaf ears. My parents dismissed her concerns, claiming I was just difficult or that I needed to focus more on being obedient. My grandmother saw through it, though. Whenever she had the chance, she'd pull me aside, place a gentle hand on my shoulder, and say, "You are stronger than you know. One day, you'll prove them wrong." From favoritism to emotional abuse, as the years passed, the favoritism turned into something more sinister: emotional abuse. My parents no longer simply ignored me, they actively ridiculed me. They mocked my grades, belittled my interests, and treated me as if I were a burden. If I expressed frustration or sadness, I was accused of being ungrateful. If I tried to stand up for myself, they called me disrespectful. Things escalated when I reached my sophomore year. I had gotten grounded many times before for things as trivial as speaking too loudly or not finishing my chores quickly enough. But this time, the punishment was harsher than ever. My crime? Having Snapchat on my phone. Like any teenager, I wanted to stay connected with my friends. But in my parents' eyes, I had committed an unforgivable offense. They stormed into my room, yelling about how I had violated their trust. My dad threw my belongings around, knocking books and clothes onto the floor in his fury. Then, in a final act of control, they removed my bedroom door from its hinges. "You don't deserve privacy," my father spat. "As long as you live under this roof, you'll follow our rules." That night, as I sat in my now exposed room, the reality of my situation sank in. I wasn't just the black sheep. I was invisible to them, unless they needed someone to blame. My brother's cruelty. If my parents' mistreatment wasn't enough, my brother took it as an opportunity to make my life even worse. While I longed for our parents' approval, he reveled in their favoritism. He wasn't content with just being loved more. He wanted to make sure I knew I was less. He made it his mission to torment me. If something went missing in the house, he'd blame me, and my parents would immediately believe him. If I was grounded, he'd mock me. At school, he spread rumors about me, making up lies that painted me as a spoiled brat. Then, when his own social life began to crumble, his resentment toward me deepened. He struggled to make friends, while I naturally connected with people. His jealousy boiled over on our 14th birthday when none of his friends showed up for him, while mine took me out for ice cream. That night, he barely spoke to me, his eyes filled with hatred. Not long after, the rumors he spread about me turned dangerous. He started telling people at school that I was abusive, that I hit him. But he didn't stop at just words. He began to physically injure himself, punching his own arms and even giving himself black eyes. Then, he'd tell everyone that I had done it to him. I had no idea what was happening at first. Slowly, I noticed my friends pulling away. The whispers started, the side glances, the subtle avoidance. It wasn't until my best friend finally confronted me that I learned what was being said. I was horrified. My own twin, the person who should have been my closest ally, was tearing my life apart. When I confronted him, he smirked. "You deserve to rot alone," he said coldly. I felt the world tilt beneath me. How could someone who shared my blood, who had grown up with me, hate me this much? I wanted to tell my parents, but I knew they would believe him over me, and I was right. Because when the rumors reached the school principal, and my parents were called in, my brother didn't hesitate to sell his lies. He doubled down, painting himself as the innocent victim of my so-called violent outbursts. I pleaded with them, tears streaming down my face. But it didn't matter. My parents chose to believe him. And that was the day my life truly changed forever. That was the day they kicked me out of the house. Betrayed, abandoned, and left to survive alone. The moment my father threw my suitcase into the foyer and told me I was no longer welcome in his house, something inside me shattered. I had fought so hard to be heard, to be believed. But in the end, it didn't matter. My parents had chosen my brother's lies over me. They had chosen to exile their own daughter rather than face the truth. As I clung to my father's legs, pleading with him through sobs, I realized that my family had never truly been mine. I was nothing more than an inconvenience, an afterthought they had tolerated for 14 years. My mother stood behind my father, her face twisted with disappointment and anger, but she did nothing to stop what was happening. My twin brother? He stood smugly at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, watching my world fall apart with satisfaction. I could almost hear the unspoken words in his glare. "I won. You lost." My father's final words before slamming the door shut behind me were, "You're not our responsibility anymore." At that moment, I truly felt orphaned. I stood there in shock, my suitcase by my feet, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The home I had grown up in, the only place I had ever known, had just been taken from me. I was a child, barely old enough to understand the weight of this abandonment, yet here I was, discarded as if I had never belonged in the first place. Then, just as the last pieces of my world crumbled, my grandmother arrived. A grandmother's love, my only refuge. When she pulled up in front of the house and stepped out of her car, her face was a mask of barely controlled fury. She took one look at me, tear-streaked, trembling, and broken, and something in her snapped. My grandmother had always been the only person who made me feel loved, but that night, she became my savior. She stormed up to my parents' front door and rang the doorbell with force. My father answered, and before he could say a word, she unleashed a storm of anger I had never seen before. "How dare you do this to her?" she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "She is your daughter, your child, and you threw her out like garbage? What kind of parents are you?" My mother stepped forward, trying to defend their actions, but my grandmother wasn't having it. "Don't you dare try to justify this. I raised you better than this," she snapped. "You abandoned your own daughter over a bunch of lies because you were too blind to see the truth. If I ever hear that you tried to contact her or hurt her in any way, I will make sure you regret it." For the first time in my life, I saw my parents speechless. They had always been the ones in control, the ones who dictated how things would go, but in that moment, they had no power. My grandmother had stripped them of it with nothing more than the raw force of truth. Without waiting for a response, she turned to me, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered, "You're coming home with me." And just like that, she rescued me from the nightmare my parents had created. Adjusting to a new life living with my grandmother was a stark contrast to the suffocating life I had known with my parents. For the first time, I wasn't constantly criticized or compared to my brother. I wasn't walking on eggshells, terrified of making a mistake that would earn me their wrath. Instead, I was met with warmth, patience, and most of all, love. My grandmother did everything she could to make me feel safe and valued. She listened when I spoke, encouraged me to pursue my interests, and reminded me every day that I was enough. It was something I had never heard before. But despite her kindness, the scars of my past still haunted me. When my suspension ended, I had no choice but to return to school. If I thought being abandoned by my parents was the worst thing that could happen, I quickly realized that walking into those hallways was even more terrifying. The rumors my brother had spread hadn't died down, they had thrived. The moment I stepped foot in the building, I could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on me. Students whispered as I walked past, their eyes filled with suspicion and disdain. My old friends barely acknowledged me, some even turning away as if my presence was contaminating. I had been branded. No matter how much I protested, no matter how desperately I tried to explain, the damage was done. In their eyes, I was still the violent, jealous twin who had attacked her own brother. Even teachers looked at me differently. Some treated me with forced neutrality, while others went out of their way to keep their distance. The trust I had once had in the school, in my peers, in the idea that truth would always prevail, was completely shattered. And my brother? He thrived in the chaos he created. He walked through the halls with an air of confidence, basking in the sympathy of others. He had gained friends once who saw him as the poor, abused brother who had been tormented by his sister, and he never acknowledged me. It was as if I had become a ghost, a stain he had successfully erased from his life. The loneliest year of my life, I spent the rest of high school as an outcast. Every day, I went through the motions attending classes, sitting alone in the cafeteria, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might throw another insult my way. My once vibrant personality had faded. I was no longer the friendly, outgoing girl I had once been. I had learned that people would believe lies if they were convenient. That truth didn't matter when a false narrative was more entertaining. That even those you love the most could betray you without hesitation. But through it all, my grandmother remained my anchor. She constantly reminded me that high school would not last forever, that one day I would build a life where I was respected and valued. And so I endured. I focused on my studies, determined to make something of myself. If I couldn't change the past, I could at least take control of my future. And then, finally, the day came. The day I walked across that stage, diploma in hand, and stepped into a world where I would finally be free. Free from my parents, free from my brother's lies, free to create the life I deserved. What I didn't know then was that my past would try to haunt me again years later, that the family who had abandoned me would come crawling back, not with apologies, but with demands. But by then, I had become someone they could no longer manipulate. I had become unstoppable, breaking free, finding strength beyond betrayal. The day I graduated high school was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to finally leave behind the pain, the betrayal, and the lies that had defined my childhood. As I walked across that stage and accepted my diploma, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and an overwhelming desire to move forward. But even as I left my school behind, the wounds inflicted by my past still clung to me like shadows. For years, I had been cast aside by my own family, betrayed by the one person who should have stood by my side, my twin brother. I had learned the hard way that truth didn't always win, that people would rather believe a comfortable lie than face an inconvenient reality. But I also learned something else. I could survive on my own. My grandmother, my only true supporter, had spent those difficult years reminding me that I was worth more than the pain I had endured. She encouraged me to dream beyond my past, beyond the limitations my parents had placed on me. And so, as I packed my bags for college, I made a promise to myself. I would never allow anyone to control my life again. A life of freedom and discovery. For the first time in my life, I was free. College was everything I had hoped for and more. I no longer had to walk through hallways lined with judgmental stares or endure the whispers of classmates who had branded me as a monster. Here, no one knew my past. No one cared about the lies my brother had told. I was just me, a freshman eager to embrace a future filled with possibilities. I threw myself into my studies, determined to excel in a way that was my own, not in competition with anyone else. I made friends, real friends, who liked me for who I was, not for some fabricated image of who I was supposed to be. I laughed freely, spoke without fear, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. But more than anything, I found something I never expected: my passion for writing. I had always loved storytelling, but growing up, my parents had never encouraged it. To them, writing was a frivolous hobby, a distraction from the real goals they had set for me. But in college, I discovered a whole new world of possibilities. I started taking on small freelance writing jobs, helping students edit papers, crafting blog posts, and even dabbling in content, writing for businesses. What had started as a side gig quickly turned into something much bigger. By the time I graduated, I had built a steady clientele, working with brands and businesses that valued my skills. And best of all, I was making my own money on my own terms. I didn't need my parents. I didn't need their approval. I was thriving without them, turning pain into purpose. As my career in content writing took off, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The girl who had once been cast out of her own home was now a self-sufficient, independent woman. I had built a life for myself, one that was entirely mine. But no matter how much success I found, the scars of my past remained. There were nights when I lay awake, haunted by the memories of my father's cold words, my mother's indifference, and my brother's betrayal. There were moments of self-doubt, when I questioned whether I was truly free of them or if their ghosts would always linger in my mind. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I made a decision: I would no longer run from my past. Instead, I would use it. I began sharing my story through my writing. I wrote about resilience, about overcoming adversity, about reclaiming one's worth after being told you had none. I used my pain as fuel, turning my experiences into lessons that could inspire others. And people listened. My work started gaining traction, and soon I was being invited to speak at seminars and conferences about my journey. My words resonated with people who had faced their own struggles, who had been cast aside, who had been made to feel small by those who were supposed to love them. For the first time, I felt like my pain had a purpose, success that couldn't be ignored. As my career flourished, my reputation grew. I began working with major brands, collaborating on projects that allowed me to combine my skills as a writer with my passion for storytelling. My social media presence expanded, and my work was being shared across different platforms. And then, the unexpected happened. A clip of one of my seminar speeches went viral. In it, I spoke about overcoming betrayal and using adversity as a stepping stone rather than a barrier. The video was reposted across multiple platforms, and before I knew it, My inbox was flooded with messages from strangers who resonated with my story, from fellow writers seeking advice, and from business owners eager to work with me. And, most surprisingly, from my family. My parents, the same people who had thrown me out of their home without hesitation, were suddenly reaching out. The same mother who hadn't called me in years had left 6 missed calls on my phone. My father, who had deemed me unworthy of his home, was now inquiring about my life. At first, I thought they wanted to apologize, that maybe, just maybe, they had finally realized the depth of their cruelty. But I was wrong. They didn't want forgiveness. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted money. The price of betrayal. When I finally answered their call, my mother's voice was unnervingly cheerful, as if we hadn't been estranged for over a decade. She congratulated me on my success, gushing about how proud she was, how she had always known I was destined for greatness. My father chimed in, asking about my income, my work, my financial stability. And then the truth came out. Their house was falling apart. They needed renovations. They had no savings left. They wanted me, the daughter they had abandoned, to pay for it. I felt a cold rage settle over me. After all these years, after all the pain they had put me through, they had the audacity to demand my help, to act as if they were entitled to my success, as if they had played any role in the woman I had become. I knew then that they hadn't changed. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They were reaching out because they needed me, and I was not about to let them take from me ever again. As my mother prattled on about how families should help each other, I made a decision. If they wanted my help, they would have to earn it. And for the first time in my life, I held the power. Exposing the truth, a lesson in consequences. For years, I had been cast aside, my voice silenced, my truth ignored. My parents had abandoned me, my twin brother had destroyed my reputation, and the people who should have protected me had turned a blind eye. Now, after all this time, they had the audacity to reach out, not to make amends, not to apologize, but to demand money as if I owed them anything. Their shameless request for financial support infuriated me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about their entitlement, their refusal to acknowledge the years of suffering they had inflicted upon me. They wanted the benefits of my success without ever having supported me in the first place. So, I made them an offer. If they wanted my help, they had to publicly admit the truth. They had to acknowledge the years of emotional abuse, the blatant favoritism, and most importantly, the lies my brother had told that led to my expulsion from our home. I wanted them to humiliate him the same way they had humiliated me. I wanted them to experience the same sense of betrayal I had felt for years. I knew they would never go through with it, but that was the point. This was my way of showing them that they could no longer manipulate me. I was no longer the helpless teenager they had cast aside. I was successful, independent, and in complete control. Their reaction was exactly what I expected. My mother and father immediately tried to argue, claiming that my condition was unnecessary. They insisted that we could have a private discussion without dragging my brother into it. My father, clearly growing frustrated, raised his voice, demanding that I fulfill my duty as a daughter. My mother played the guilt card, reminding me of the years they had spent raising me as if they hadn't completely discarded me when it was convenient for them. I stood firm. I told them that I owed them nothing. I reminded them that it was my grandmother, not them, who had raised me after they threw me out, that she was the only one who had believed in me, who had supported me, who had never once abandoned me. I told them that if they weren't willing to admit the truth, then they would get nothing from me ever. Then I hung up. The final blow, a public reckoning. I expected them to persist, and I was right. Over the next few days, my parents bombarded my phone with calls and messages. Each one was more desperate than the last. At first, they tried to reason with me, attempting to guilt me into compliance. When that failed, their messages turned angry and accusatory. They called me selfish, ungrateful, and heartless. Then my brother got involved. He sent me a long, nasty message filled with his usual arrogance and cruelty. He mocked me, saying he was glad I had been out of his life all these years. He laughed at my ultimatum, telling me our parents would never betray him the way they had betrayed me. He admitted proudly that he had lied all those years ago. He taunted me, saying that it had been so easy to manipulate them and that I needed to just move on because they would always choose him over me. That was it. I was done letting them control the narrative. Fueled by a sense of justice and a desire to ensure they would never contact me again, I decided to expose them. I wrote an email to every close relative, family friend, and even some of the people from my past who had believed my brother's lies. In it, I told the full story. I detailed the years of favoritism, the way my parents had treated me like an outsider in my own home. I described the false rumors my brother had spread, how he had faked injuries and convinced our school and family that I was violent. I included the part where he admitted, in his own words, that he had fabricated everything. To make it undeniable, I attached screenshots of his recent messages, the ones where he boasted about his lies. I didn't hold back. I made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with my family anymore, that I was exposing them not to seek revenge, but to ensure they never had the chance to manipulate or hurt me again. I sent the email and waited. Watching their world crumble, the fallout was immediate. Relatives who had never known the full extent of what had happened started reaching out, apologizing for not realizing how badly I had been treated. Some of them were furious with my parents, demanding answers. Others simply expressed their regret for not standing up for me sooner. My parents, on the other hand, lost their minds. They started calling me even more aggressively, leaving voicemail after voicemail. My father yelled, my mother cried, but I ignored them all. Then, my brother sent another message this time, filled with rage. I had humiliated him. His friends, the few who still stood by him, now knew the truth. His colleagues, acquaintances, even distant relatives had all seen the message. He was furious, embarrassed, and unable to twist the story in his favor. For once in his life, he was the one facing the consequences of his actions, cutting ties for good. It didn't take long before their desperation turned into outright hostility. When they realized I wasn't going to back down, my parents' messages turned venomous. They accused me of trying to destroy the family. My mother claimed that I was heartless for bringing up the past. My father told me I was nothing without them. I knew I had done the right thing. I reached out to a lawyer and had a cease and desist letter sent to them, officially demanding that they stop all contact with me. If they continued their harassment, they would face legal consequences. It worked. The calls stopped. The messages stopped. And just like that, they were gone from my life. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Moving forward without regret since cutting ties with my family, my life has only gotten better. My career continues to thrive, and my support system, my grandmother, my friends, and my colleagues, has never been stronger. I've started therapy to fully heal from the years of emotional damage they inflicted, and for the first time, I am allowing myself to let go of the resentment I once held. My parents and my brother? They are nothing more than a chapter in my past, a painful lesson, but one that shaped me into the strong, independent woman I am today. They will never get a second chance to hurt me, and I will never look back. The final break, embracing freedom and moving forward. After sending the cease and desist letter, the silence was almost eerie. For years, I had lived with the noise of my family's constant rejection, the weight of my brother's manipulation, and the suffocating sense of abandonment. Now, for the first time, there was peace. No more desperate phone calls, no more accusatory messages, no more guilt-laden attempts to reel me back in. The past few months had been a whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and long overdue justice. I had finally exposed the truth about my childhood, my parents' blatant favoritism, and my brother's cruel lies. For years, I had been cast as the villain, but now the people who had so easily believed my brother's fabricated stories finally knew what had really happened. It didn't undo the pain of the past, but it gave me something I never thought I'd have: vindication. But even as the dust settled, I knew my journey wasn't over. Healing wasn't as simple as cutting off toxic family members. The wounds they left behind still ached, and I realized that moving forward meant more than just walking away from them. It meant actively choosing my own happiness, rebuilding my sense of self-worth, and learning to embrace the love and support of those who had always stood by me. Breaking generational chains. For years, I had struggled with the idea that I was somehow unworthy of love simply because my own family had rejected me. Even after achieving success in my career, traveling the world, and finding fulfillment in my work, there was always a lingering voice in the back of my mind, the voice that had been instilled in me as a child, whispering that I would never be enough. Therapy became an important part of my healing process. At first, I wasn't sure if it would help, but as I worked through my experiences, I began to see how deeply the emotional abuse of my childhood had shaped my self-perception. I had spent years believing I had to earn love, that I had to prove my worth through success, through achievement, through external validation. But the truth was, I had always been enough. I just needed to believe it. One of the hardest things to confront was the realization that my parents' treatment of me wasn't my fault. It wasn't about anything I had done wrong. It was about their own deep-seated biases and failures as parents. The way they treated me versus my brother wasn't because I lacked value, but because they had chosen to see him as superior from the start. No amount of effort on my part would have changed that. Accepting this allowed me to let go of the guilt I had unknowingly carried for so long. I wasn't responsible for my family's failures. I wasn't responsible for their mistreatment of me. And most importantly, I wasn't responsible for fixing the damage they had done. Cherishing real family. Through all of this, my grandmother remained my one constant. She had always been my safe haven, the only person who had believed in me when everyone else turned their backs. With everything that had happened, I knew I wanted to spend more time with her, to cherish the moments we had together. I took a break from work and dedicated time to her, visiting more often, sitting with her as she worked in her garden, listening to her stories, and simply enjoying her company. She had been my true family all along, and I owed her everything. She had stood by me when no one else had, and in many ways, she had saved my life. She reminded me that family isn't about blood. It's about the people who love and support you unconditionally. And in that moment, I realized I had found my true family in the people who had always been there for me, my grandmother, my friends, my colleagues, who had become like siblings. I no longer longed for the approval of people who had never truly loved me. Building a future without regret, cutting off my parents, and my brother wasn't just about protecting myself from their toxicity, it was about giving myself permission to truly live. For so long, my identity had been tied to the pain they had caused me, to the desire for justice, for acknowledgement, for an apology that would never come. Now, I was free to write my own story, unburdened by the past. My career was thriving more than ever, and I threw myself into my work, not as a means of proving my worth, but as something I genuinely loved. Opportunities continued to come in, and I found joy in sharing my knowledge with others through seminars, mentoring, and speaking engagements. It felt good to know that my success wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about helping others find their own path as well. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. No contact, no regrets. As the months passed, I occasionally received updates from mutual acquaintances about my parents and my brother. I learned that my parents had grown bitter about my refusal to help them, blaming me for their financial struggles rather than taking responsibility for their own failures. My brother, humiliated and ostracized by some of our extended family, continued to live in denial, refusing to acknowledge the full extent of his wrongdoing. None of it mattered to me anymore. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I never responded to their attempts to reach out. I never second-guessed my decision, and I never felt guilty. The past was behind me, and I had no intention of reopening a door that had been slammed shut for good. A life of my own these days. My life is filled with love, purpose, and freedom. I no longer carry the weight of the past on my shoulders. I no longer seek validation from those who never saw my worth. I have built a life that is truly my own, surrounded by people who care for me, who respect me, and who have never once made me feel like I needed to prove myself to be loved. For anyone who has ever been cast aside by the people who were supposed to love them, I want them to know this. You are not defined by those who fail to see your worth. You are not obligated to keep toxic people in your life just because they share your blood. You deserve happiness. You deserve love. You deserve to be free. And most importantly, you deserve to live a life without regret. The power of self-worth and letting go. Life teaches us that not all relationships, even those bound by blood, are meant to last forever. Sometimes, the people we expect to love and support us are the very ones who cause us the deepest wounds. But pain, betrayal, and abandonment do not define our worth. True strength comes from recognizing when to walk away and choosing to build a life filled with love, purpose, and self-respect. Holding on to resentment only prolongs suffering, while letting go allows healing. It is never too late to surround ourselves with those who truly value us, whether they are family by blood or by heart. True family is not about obligation. It is about love, kindness, and mutual respect. The past cannot be changed, but the future is ours to shape. As we grow older, we realize that peace is worth more than forced relationships. Life is too short to seek approval from those who will never give it. Instead, we should invest our time in people who bring us joy, in passions that fulfill us, and in the quiet confidence of knowing we are enough just as we are.